So we're going to talk a little bit about intelligent design. That's a sort of a worldview or philosophy of science, and it has this general sort of overview that there are natural systems that cannot be adequately explained in terms of undirected natural forces, and that exhibit features which in any other circumstances we would attribute to intelligence. If you look at the world around us, you can see those kinds of events. So there is a field of study which looks at that. Let me give you a simple example to help us focus on what this means. Next slide. Here are two images, two geologic formations taken from the western part of our country. One is from Monument Valley, one is from Bryce Canyon. You'll notice that they're clearly the result of some kind of random forces. Even though there's structure and shape to them, the structures and shapes are not smooth. They don't show any clear identity. Even though there's a hole, there seems to be no purpose for the hole. It's just a random accumulation of the actions of wind, and rain, and water, and volcanoes. Next slide. Here's another geologic formation. This comes from the upper Midwest. It also has rocks, but suddenly these rocks don't seem to have the same kind of random pattern. We can see things here that say, there's some intelligence involved in this pattern. And in fact, we know from history that there was a man who hung himself off the top of that mountain and chiseled away bits and pieces, and used dynamite in some cases, to create these images. And you can see the residuals of that laying on the side of the mountain down below. So this is what intelligent design is all about. Looking at structures and saying, does it make sense to say that the images on the side of this mountain came from natural random events? And we think that we can assign some probabilities for that, and we can say, it's likely that this didn't occur by simple chance. Is it saying that it's not completely possible that we could have a freak of nature that blew the right way and had the right kind of rain, acid rain or whatever, and result in something that looked like this? Well, all those forces could be present, but for them to actually make an image that we can recognize as somebody from our past would be very, very improbable. To understand why I think that intelligent design is a reasonable tool to examine the world around us, we need to go back and look again at the nature of God. So I'm going to pick up a little bit where Bruce left off. Next slide. The nature of God. This is the passage that Bruce just read for us from Genesis. Talks about how man was made in the image of God with some, or maybe all of the attributes of God, but not all of his capabilities. So we inherit from God the capabilities. So man is somehow unique and has these attributes of God. Next slide. Man also has a relationship to God. Here we find in Psalms, David writing, he says, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the many works of your hands, and you put everything under his feet." So David here acknowledges there's a special place for man in the world. Bruce also made a couple of points indicating the same thing. We have a responsibility to the world. Man was to rule the world, to care for it, to use our resources wisely, to learn about its workings. So we have a place, a role in the universe that's different than all the other creatures. Next slide. The nature of man. Here's a passage that Bruce also cited, which talks, or didn't cite rather. This says, "I know now the whole world had one language and a common speech. And as man moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. And they said to each other, 'Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' And they used brick instead of stone, and tar for mortar. And then they said, 'Come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. And the Lord said, if as one people, speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. So here we see from the very beginning of written history that man has a creative nature, an engineering nature, a desire to build things that illustrate his capabilities. I thought of this passage the very first time and every time since that I went up and visited the Sears Tower in Chicago. At the time that I first visited, it was considered the tallest structure in the world. And when you got up there and you looked down and you could see all of the roads and the railroads and the bridges and the buildings and the smaller buildings and the airports, you could see all of the things that man had built. And this came to mind because at this time, the language of science and the language of engineering is English. We are once again a people of one language. Whatever we put to our minds will not be impossible for us. So if we put to our minds to destroy our world, we can do that. We put to our minds to take care of it and make it a better place, we can do that as well. Because we have a creative nature, we can recognize the work of design, the work of intelligence, in other people's works as well. If you want to find out what does a piece of art say, you don't go to some elementary school student. You go to another artist. And other artists can see the art in people's work. Those of us who are in science and technology sometimes struggle with that. For us, it's just a random collection of materials or work on. But to an artist, he sees the intelligence, he sees the design, just like we have on the walls here behind us. Next slide. So what is the philosophy here? Intelligent design is actually one of the oldest philosophies on the origin of the world and all that is in it. It's not creationism. Sometimes it's called creationism, but it's not. Creationism is actually the philosophy that says the earth is only a few thousand years old, and that all of the things that we see around us, the structure of the geologic formations that we looked at, the biology, is said to be the result of Noah's flood. But there are too many observable inconsistencies to be taken, for this theory to be taken very seriously. Because under that kind of behavior, you have God taking this worldview, takes God into the great deceiver, trying to confuse the majority of humankind. Next slide. So then, intelligent design is not a religion, it's not a religious belief system, it is the science that studies signs of intelligence in the world around us. It looks at patterns and systems and in processes. It does not try to understand or unravel the mind of the intelligence. It simply tries to understand and investigate the effects of the intelligence, but not the intelligence itself. It recognizes that intelligence was used, but it doesn't try to assign anything specific to that intelligence. It's one of the oldest philosophies, next slide, of the universe. Johannes Kepler, very famous astronomer, was a proponent of it, but he overused it. He tried to apply intelligent design to speculations. So he said, well, obviously there are structures on the moon, they had to be designed. Somebody made all those structures on the moon. Today we know, of course, that when we look at the moon from the ground and we see all those structures, that in fact they're mostly craters from impacts from outer space and other kinds of activities that randomly happen at the surface of the moon. So he over-applied it here. Other people who were proponents included Newton. The concept of intelligent design is spread throughout his Principia, his most famous writing in Latin. And William Paley in 1804 was a theology student from Cambridge University, from College and Cambridge University, and he wrote a number of very important philosophical documents, many of which until about the 1920s were required reading for all students at Oxford. One that he wrote and that he considered his best piece was this one that's titled here, The Natural Theology, which talks all about evidences of design and from intelligent design. But what is the tenets? What are the real fundamental propositions of intelligent design? Well, I think there are four that have been identified. One is that specified complexity and irreducible complexity are reliable indicators or hallmarks of design. So that is, if you see a system that has a lot of complexity in it, it's pretty hard to say that that's random. When we looked at the stones, the mountains in the first set of mountains had a lot of randomness. There wasn't a lot of complexity to it. The second one had a lot of complexity to it. So we immediately said, it looks like somebody had something to do with this. Biological systems exhibit specified complexity and employ irreducibly complex subsystems. Naturalistic mechanisms or undirected causes do not suffice to explain the origin of specified complexity and irreducible complexity in biological systems. Therefore, intelligent design constitutes the best explanation of the origin of specified complexity and irreducible complexity in biological systems. So that's a series of logical arguments, and we need to look at each one of those. What is specified complexity? Specified complexity was coined as first by Leslie Orville in about 1973. Dembski says there are actually 5 ingredients in this. That specified complexity includes a probabilistic complexity applicable to events. It includes a conditionally independent patterns, a probabilistic resources for replication or specification, and specification applicable to patterns, and finally, a universal probability bound. What does all this mean? Well, number one, a probability is really a function of complexity. For example, what's the probability that somebody can steal the pen that you use for your bank card? Well, the pen for your bank card has only 4 digits. That's about 10,000 combinations. And as a result, it wouldn't take a thief very long trying every one of them to figure it out. Nor would it be unbelievable that a thief could just guess 4 digits at random and guess your pen the first try. It's that probability for that's very reasonable. However, suppose you had a 10-character password instead of a 4-digit bank pin. And that password could be made up of numbers, could be made up of uppercase characters, lowercase characters, special symbols, spaces, dashes, ampersands, whatever you want. Now, the probability that somebody could guess that on the very first try is very, very small. And so, specified complexity, that is probabilistic complexity, means it's an assessment of the improbability of an event. So the more possibilities you have, the more